Jonathan Pritz had brought with him an instrument more dangerous than any gun. He brought a printing press. In a country hungry for news and with a scarcity of reading material, the newspaper was going to be read, and people believe whatever they read must be true, or it would not be in print. Most folks don't stop to think that the writer of a book or the publisher of a newspaper may have his own axe to grind, or he may be influenced by others, or may not be in possession of all the information on the subject of which he or she writes. Don Lewis had known about Pritz's printing press before anybody else, and that was one reason he wanted his granddaughter out of the country. For a paper can be used to stir people up, and things were not like they had been. Don Lewis sent for me again and made a deal to sell me 4,000 acres of his range that joined to mine. The idea was his, and he sold it to me on a note. It's enough, Tyrel. You're a man of your word, and you can use the range. He was sitting up that day. He smiled at me. Moreover, it will be a piece of land they cannot take from me, and they will try to take it from, and they will not try to take it from you. At the same time, I bought, also with a note, 300 head of young stuff. In both cases, the notes were made payable to Drusilla. The Don was worried, and he was also smart. It was plain that he could expect nothing but trouble. Defeat had angered Jonathan Pritz, and he would never quit until he had destroyed the Don or had been destroyed himself. His settlement crowd had shifted their base to Las Vegas, although some of them were around Elizabethtown and Cimarron, causing trouble in both places. But the Don was playing it smart. Land and cattle sold to me, they would not try to take. And he felt sure I'd make good. And so Drusilla would have that much at least coming to her. Those days I saw mighty little of Orrin, although we had 1,000 or so head on the place now. Mostly young stuff that would grow into money. And the way I figured, I wasn't going to sell anything for another 3 years. And by that time, I would be in a position to make some money. Orrin, the boys, and me, we talked it over. We had no idea of running the big herds some men were handling and trying to hold big pieces of land. All the land I used, I wanted title to, and I figured it would be best to run only a few cattle and keep from overgrazing the grass and sell fat cattle. We had already found out we could get premium prices for cattle that were in good shape. Drusilla was gone. The Don was a little better, but there was more trouble. Squatters had moved into a valley on the east side of his property, and there was trouble. Pritz jumped in with his newspaper and made a lot more of the trouble than there had been. Then Orrin was made sheriff of the county, and he asked Tom to become a deputy. Now, we had a growing ranch, and everything was in hand. We needed money, and if I ever expected to make anything of myself, it was time, and I had at it. There was nothing to do about the ranch that the boys couldn't do, but I had notes to Don Lewis to pay, and it was time I started raising some money. Cap Rountree rode out to the ranch, and he got down from his horse and sat down on the stoop beside me. Cap, I said, you ever been to Montana? Uh-huh. Good country, lots of grass, lots of mountains, lots of Indians, mighty few folks except Virginia City. They got a gold strike up there. That happened some years back. Still working. He gave me a shrewd look out of those old eyes. You getting the itch too? I need money. We're in debt, Cap. And I never liked being beholden to anybody. It seems to me we might strike out north and see what we can find. You want to come along? Might as well. I'm getting the fidgets here. So we rode over to Tom's Sunday, and Tom was drinking more than a man should. He'd bought a ranch for himself about 10 miles from us. He had some good grass, a fair house, but it was a rawhide outfit, generally speaking. Not at all like Tom, who was a first-class cattleman, would normally have. I'll stay here, he said. Orrin offered me a job as deputy sheriff, but I'm not taking it. I think I'll run for sheriff myself, next election. Orrin would like to have you, I said. It's hard to get good men. Hell, Tom said harshly. He should be working for me. By rights, it should be my job. Maybe. You had your chance at it. He sat down at the table and stared moodily out of the window. Cap got to his feet. Might as well come along, he said. If you don't find any gold, you'll still see some fine country. Thanks, he said. I'll stay here. We mounted up, and Tom put a hand on my saddle. Ty, he said, I've got nothing against you. You're a good man. So's Orrin, Tom, and he likes you. He ignored it. Have a good time. If you get in trouble, write me, and I'll come up and pull you out of it. Thanks. And if you get in trouble, you send for us. He was still standing there on the steps when we rode away, and I looked back when I could barely make him out, but he was still standing there. Long as I've known him, Cap, I said. That was the first time I ever saw Tom Sunday without a shave. Cap glanced at me out of those cold eyes. He cleaned his gun, he said. He didn't forget that. The aspen were like clusters of golden candles on the green hills, and we rode north into a changing world. Within 2 weeks, we'll be freezing our ears off, Cap commented. Nonetheless, his eyes were keen and sharp, and Cap sniffed in the breeze each morning, like a buffalo hunting wolf. He was a new man, so was I, and maybe this was what I lived for. Maybe this was what I was bred for, roaming the wild country, living off of it, and moving on. In Durango, we hired out and worked 2 weeks on a roundup crew, gathering cattle, roping and branding calves. Then we drifted west into Abajo Mountains, sometimes called the Blues. It was a mighty big country, 2/3 of it standing on edge, seemed like. We rode through country that looked like hell with the fires out, and we camped out at night among the cool pines. Our tiny fire was the only light in a vast world of darkness, for any way we looked, there was nothing but night and the stars. The smell of coffee was good, and the smell of fresh wood burning. We hadn't seen a rider for 3 days when we camped among the pines up there in the Blues. We hadn't seen a track in almost as long, expecting deer tracks, cat or bear tracks. Out of the Pioche, I got a job riding shotgun for a stage line with Cap Rountree handling the ribbons. We stayed with it 2 months. Only one holdup was attempted while I rode shotgun because it seemed I was a talked-about man. That one holdup didn't pan out for them because I dropped off the stage and shot the gun out of one of the outlaws' hands. It was an accident, as my foot slipped on a rock and spoiled my aim, and put 2 holes in the other one. When we took them back in town and the shot one lived, he lived, but he didn't learn. 6 months later, they caught him stealing a horse and hung him in the frame over the nearest ranch gate. At South Pass City, we holed up to wait out a storm, and I read in the newspaper how Orrin was running for state legislature. and well spoken of. Orrin was young, but it was a time for young men, and he was as old as Alexander Hamilton in 1776, and older than William Pitt when he was Chancellor in England, as old as Napoleon when he completed his Italian campaign. I'd come across a book by Jomini on Napoleon and another by Vitigius on the tactics of the Roman legions. Most of the time, I read penny dreadfuls as they were all a buddy could find, except once in a while, those paper-bound classics given away by the Bull Durham Company for companies they enclosed. A man could find those all over the West, and many a cowhand had read all 360 of them. We camped along the mountain streams. We fished, we hunted, we survived. Here and yonder, we had a brush with Indians. One time, we outran a bunch of Blackfeet, and another time we had a set to with some Sioux, and I got a nicked ear out of that one, and Cap lost a horse. So we came into Laramie astride Montana horse, the both of us riding him. Spring was coming, and we rode north with the changing weather and staked a claim on a creek in Idaho. But nothing contented me anymore. We made our living but little more than that. We'd taken a bunch of furs and sold out well, and I'd made a payment to Don Lewis and sent some money home. There was a 2x4 town near where we staked our claim. I mean, there was no town but a cluster of shacks and a saloon called the Rose Marie, and a big man with a square red face, sandy red hair, and small blue eyes ran the place. He laid his thick hands on the bar, and you saw the scars on his old fistfights there. And those little eyes studied you cruel, like he was figuring out how much you'd be worth to him. "What'll you have, gents? Something to cut the dust?" "Out of the bottle in the cabinet," I said, as I'd seen him take a drink out of it himself. "We'll have a shot of that bourbon." "I can recommend the barrel whiskey." "I bet you can. Give it to us from the bottle." "My own whiskey? I don't usually sell it." There were two men sitting at the back table, and they were sizing us up. One thing I noticed about those men, they got their service without paying. I had a hunch they were working for the firm, and if they did, what did they do? "My name is Brady," the red-haired man said. "Martin Brady." "Good," I said. "A man should have a name." We put our money on the bar and turned to go. "You keep that bottle handy." We tried that river whiskey before. After 3 days, we had only a spot or two of color. Straightening up from my pick, I said, "Cap, the way I hear it, we should have a burro. And when the burro strays, we follow him. And when we find that burro, he's pawing away pay dirt right out of the ground. Or you pick up a chunk to chuck at the burro, and it turns out to be pretty good gold." "Don't you believe all you hear?" He pushed his hat back. "I've been looking the ground over here, over there." He indicated what looked like an old stream bed. "That crick flowed for centuries. If there's gold in that crick, there's more of it under that bench right there." Up on that bench, we cut timber and we built a flume to carry water and a sluice box. Placer mining isn't just a matter of scooping up sand and washing it out in a pan. The amount of gold a man can get away with is mighty little. In most places, he can do well punching cows or riding shotgun on a stage. The thing to do is locate some color and then choose a likely spot, like this bench, and sink a shaft down to the bedrock, panning all the way through that gravel that comes off the bedrock, working down and get all the cracks to peel off any loose slabs and work the gravel gathered beneath them. Gold is heavy, and over the years it works deeper through the loose earth or gravel until it reaches bedrock and can go no further. When we started to get down beyond 6 feet, we commenced getting some good color, and we worked all the ground. We removed from there on. Of a night, I'd often sit up late reading whatever came to hand. and gradually I was learning a good bit about a lot of things. On the next claim, there was a man named Clark who loaned me several books. Most of my reading a man could get was pretty good stuff. Nobody wanted to carry anything else that far. Clark came out to our fire one night. "Cap, you make the best sourdough bread I ever ate. I'm going to miss it." "You taking out?" "She's deep enough, Cap. I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm going back to the States, to my wife and family. I worked in a store for 6, 7 years and always wanted one of my own." "You be careful," Cap said. Clark glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Have you heard about those yarns, too? About the killings?" "They found William's body last week," I said. "He'd been buried in a shallow grave, but the coyotes dug him out." I knew him. Clark accepted another plate of beans and beef, and then he said, "I believe those stories. Wilton was carrying a heavy poke, and he wasn't a man to talk it around." He forked up some more beans, and then he paused. "Sackett, you've been talked up as a man who's good with a gun." "It's exaggerated. If you ride with me, I'll pay you $100 each." "That's good money. But what about our claim?" "This means everything to me, boys. I talked to Dickey and Wells. They're reliable men who will watch your claim." Cap lit up his pipe, and I poured coffee for all of us. Clark just wasn't a woofing. Most of the miners who gambled their money away at the Rosemary bar in town had no trouble leaving. It was only those who tried to leave with their money. At least 3 were sitting atop some fat pokes of gold, wondering how to get out alive and still keep what they'd worked for. "Clark," I said, "Cap and me, we need the money. We'd help you if you couldn't afford to pay. Even if you couldn't afford to pay. Believe me, it's worth it." So I got up off the ground. "Cap, I'll just go in and have a little talk with Martin Brady." Clark got up. "You're crazy." "Why, I wouldn't want him to think us deceitful, Clark. I'll just go tell him we're riding out tomorrow. I'll also tell him what will happen if anybody bothers us." There will be 30 or 40 men. There were 30 or 40 men in the Rosemary when I came in. Brady came to see me, drying his big hands on his apron. "We're fresh out of bourbon," he said. "You'll have to take bar whiskey. I just came to tell you, Jim Clark is riding out of the country tomorrow, and he's taking all that gold he didn't spend in here." You could hear a pin drop when I spoke those words. I said them out loud so everybody could hear. Brady's cigar rolled beneath his teeth, and he got white around the eyes. But I had an eye on the 2 loafers at the end of the bar. "Why tell me?" He didn't know what was coming, but he knew he wouldn't like it. "Somebody might think Clark was going alone," I said. "And they might try to kill him the way Wilton and Jax and Thompson were killed. But I figured it would be deceitful of me to ride along with Clark and let somebody get killed trying to get his gold. You see, Clark is going to make it out." "I hope he does." Brady rolled a cigar again. Those cold little eyes telling me they hated me. "He's a good man." He started to walk away, but I wasn't through with him. "Brady?" He turned slowly. "Clark is going through because I'm going to see that he gets through. And when he's gone, I'm coming back." "So?" He put his big hands on the edge of the bar. "What does that mean?" "It means that if we have any troubles at all, I'm going to come back here and either run you out of town or bury you." Somebody gasped. Brady's face turned a kind of sick white. He was that mad. It sounds like you're calling me a thief. He kept both hands in plain sight. You'd have to prove that. Prove it? Who to? Everybody knows what killing and robbery there has been was engineered by you. There's no court here but a six-shooter court, and I'm presiding. So nothing happened. It was like I figured, and it was out in the open now. And Martin Brady had to have me killed, but he didn't dare do it right then. We put Clark on the stage, and we started back to our own claims. We were almost to bedrock now, and we wanted to clean up and get out. We were getting the itch to go back to Santa Fe and back to Mora. And besides, I kept thinking of Drusilla. Bob Wells was sitting on our claims with a rifle across his knees when we came in. I was getting spooked, he said. It don't seem like Brady to take this laying down. Dickie came over from his claim and several others, two of whom I remembered from the Rose Marie saloon that night I told Martin Brady off. We've been talking it around, Dickie said. We figure you should be marshal. No. Can you name anybody else? Wells asked reasonably. This gold strike is going to play out, but a few of the mines will continue to work, and I plan to stay on here, and I want to open a business, and I want this to be a clean town. The others all pitched in, and finally Dickie said, Sackett, with all respect, I believe it's your public duty. Now, I was beginning to see where reading can make a man trouble. Reading Locke, Hume, and Jefferson, and Madison had made me begin to think mighty high of a man's public duty. Violence is an evil thing, but when the guns are all in the hands of men without respect for human rights, then men are really in trouble. It was all right for folks back east to give reasons why troubles should be handled without violence. Folks who talk about no violence are always the ones who are the first to call a policeman, and usually they're sure there's one handy. All right, I said, on two conditions. First, that somebody takes over when the town is cleaned up. And second, that you raise money enough to buy out Martin Brady. Buy him out? I say run him out. Who is it? Yelled, I don't know, but I spoke right up in meeting. All right, whoever you are, you run him out. There was a silence then. And when they had gathered the fact that the speaker wasn't going to offer, I said, we run him out, and we're no better than he is. All right, Wells agreed. Buy him out. Well, now, I said, we can be too hasty. I didn't say we should buy him out. What I said is we should offer. We make him a cash offer, and whatever he does then is up to him. Next day in town, I got down from my horse in front of the store. Wind blew dust along the street and skittered dry leaves along the boardwalk. It gave me a lonesome feeling looking down the street. I had a feeling the town would die. No matter what happened here, what I was going to do was important. Maybe not for this town, but for men everywhere. For there must be right. Strength never made right, and it is an indecency when it is allowed to breed corruption. The West was changing, and one time they would have organized vigilantes and had some necktie parties, but now they were hiring a marshal, and the next step would be a town meeting and a judge and then a mayor. Martin Brady saw me come in. His two men standing at the bar saw me too, and one of them moved a mite so his gun could be right under his hand and not under the edge of the bar. There was nothing jumpy inside me, just slow, measured, waiting feeling. Around me, everything seemed clearer, sharper in detail. The shadows and lights, the grain of wood on the bar, the stains left by the glasses, a slight tick on the cheek of one of Brady's men, and he was 40 feet away. Brady, this country is growing up. Folks are moving in. They want schools and churches and quiet towns where they can walk in the streets of an evening. He never took his eyes from me, and I had a feeling he knew what was coming. Right then, I felt sorry for Martin Brady, although his kind would outlast my kind because people have a greater tolerance for evil than for violence. If crooked gambling, thieving, and robbing are covered over, folks will tolerate it longer than outright violence, even when the violence may be cleansing. Folks had much to say about the evil of those years, yet it took hard men to live the life, and their pleasures were apt to be rough and violent. They came from the world around, the younger sons of fine families, the ne'er-do-wells, the soldiers of fortune, the drifters, the always broke, the promoters, the conmen, the thieves. The frontier asked no questions, and it gave its rewards to the strong. Maybe it needed men like Martin Brady, even the kind who lived on murder and robbery, to plant a town here at such a jumping-off place to nowhere. An odd thought occurred to me. Why had he called the saloon and town the Rose Marie? Like I said, the country is growing up, Martin. You've been selling people rot-gut liquor. You've been cheating. You've been cheating them out of their hide and hair. You've been robbing and murdering them. Murdering them was going too far, Martin, because when you start killing men, they fight back. What are you getting at, Sackett? They elected me marshal. So? You sell out, Martin. They'll pay you a fair price. You sell out, and you get out. He took the cigar from his teeth with his left hand, and he rested that hand on the bar. And if I don't want to sell, you have no choice. He smiled and leaned toward me as if to say something in a low tone. And when he did, he touched that burning cigar to the back of my hand. My hand jerked and I realized the trick too late, and those gunmen down the bar, who had evidently seen it done before, shot me full of holes. My hand jerked and then guns were hammering. A slug hit me and turned away from the bar, and 2 more bullets grooved the edge of the bar where I'd been standing. Another slug hit me and I started to fall, but my gun was out, and I rolled over on the floor with bullets kicking, splinters at my eyes, and shot the big one with the dark eyes. He was coming up to me for a finishing shot, and I put a bullet in his brisket and saw him stop dead, still, turn half around, and fall. Then I was rolling over on my feet, and out of the corner of my eye I saw Martin Brady standing with both hands on the bar and a cigar in his teeth, watching me. My shirt was smoldering where it had caught fire from the black powder, but I shot the other man, taking my time. And my second bullet drove teeth back into his mouth, and I saw the blood dribble from the corner of his mouth. They were both down, and they weren't getting up. And I looked at Martin Brady and I said, "You haven't a choice, Martin." His face turned strange and shapeless, and I felt myself falling, and I remembered Ma asking me about Long Higgins. There were cracks in the ceiling. It seemed I lay there staring at them for a dozen years, and remembered that it had been a long time since I'd been in a house and wondered if I was delirious. Cap Rountree came into the room, and I turned my head and looked at him. If this here is hell, they sure picked the right people for it. Never knew a man find so many excuses to get out of doing his work, Cap grumbled. How much longer do I have to do the work in this shebang? You're an old pirate, I said, who never did an honest day's work in his life. Cap came back and with a bowl of soup, which he started spooning into me. Last time I recollect, they were shooting holes in me. Did you plug 'em up? You'll hold soup. Only maybe all your sand runs out. On my hand, I could see the scar of the cigar burn, almost healed now. That was one I was sure enough outsmarted. One time. It was one trick Pa never told me about, and I had to learn it the hard way. You took 4 bullets, Cap said, and lost a sight more blood than a man can afford. What about Brady? He lit a shuck while they were hunting a rope to hang him. Cap sat down. Funny thing, he showed up here the next night. Here? He stopped by to see how you was. Said you were too good a man to die like that. Both of you were damn fools, but a man got into a way of living and there was no way but to go on. And the others? Oh, those boys of his, they were shot to doll rags. Outside the door, I could see the sunshine on the creek, and I could hear the water chuckling over the rocks, and I got to thinking of Ma and Drusilla, and one day, when I could sit up, I looked over at Cap. Anything left out there? Ain't been a day's wages in weeks. If you figure to do any more mining, you better find yourself another creek. Let's go home. Come morning, you saddle up. He looked at me skeptically. Can you sit in the saddle? If I'm going home, I can sit in the saddle. I can sit in the saddle if I'm headed for Santa Fe. The next morning, Cap and me headed as due south as the country would allow. But it's a long way in the saddle from Idaho to New Mexico. From time to time, we heard news about Sackets. Men on the trail carried news along with them, and everybody was on the prod to know all that was going on. The Sackett news was all Orrin. It would take a while for the story of what happened at the Rosemarie to get around, and I'd as soon as it never did. But Orrin was making a name for himself, only there was a rumor that he was to be married. Cap told me that because he'd heard it before I did, and neither of us made comments. Cap felt as I did about Laura Pritz, and we were afraid it was her. We rode right out to the ranch. Bob came out to meet us, and Joe was right behind him. Ma had seen us coming up the road. She came to the steps to meet me. Ma was better than she'd been in years, a credit to few worries and a better climate, I suppose. There was a Navajo woman helping with the housework now, and for the first time, Ma had it easier. There were bookshelves in the parlor, and both the boys had taken to reading. And there was other news. Don Lewis was dead. He'd been buried only 2 days ago, but allegedly the settlement crowd had moved in. Taurus was in bad shape. He had been ambushed months ago, and from what I was told, there was small chance he'd be himself again. Drusilla was in town, and Orrin was married to Laura Pritz.